Welcome to the Muscle Activation Techniques podcast, trusted over decades to relieve pain and restore mobility by top pro athletes. Our revolutionary technique is a game changer for patient and practitioner.
We have a fascinating case study in front of us right now, which is Bryson Dechambeau, who you've worked with for a number of years, a PGA golfer. Who was he physically when you started working with him?
When I started working with him, it was right after he finished with his college career and won the U.S. Amateur. So He was looking to go to the pro level. The technique that I've developed called muscle activation techniques, I trained trainers and therapists across the country in the technique. And when he was down in Texas, he was working with one of our MAT practitioners down there. So he worked with him through his whole college career. But it was more about muscle activation, keeping the neuromuscular system functioning. Probably more general golf specific exercises that he was doing in his training. But so he was always conditioned, but I don't think he ever took it as serious as he's taking it now. When he started working with me, once he finished college, then he wanted to start working with me. So he's been flying back and forth to Denver for treatments over the last couple of years. And that's when we, in my facility, we still look at working to activate muscles, reestablish neuromuscular function, but I also bring in the training side of it and use force as a form of training and activation. And so we started seeing kind of significant changes in his strength immediately due to altering neuromuscular function. Many times we would see like a 30% increase in strength on the spot. And when he started seeing those type of changes, then that's when it's like, now I'm going to do everything I can to get stronger. And
right. And that's without adding muscle, those 30% increases, right? That's purely neurological.
It's a neuromuscular change that it can happen immediately. When one day we were working on muscles related to spinal rotation and through a specific exercise for trunk rotation, and he literally was maxing out at 90 pounds for 5 repetitions. And literally we came back and put some intensive time, like an hour, just focusing on those muscles, reestablishing neuromuscular control. And before he left that day, he could do 150 pounds for 5 repetitions in the same manner he was doing 90 pounds earlier, and with the same effort. And so all retraining the nervous system as opposed to the physical adaptations that need to occur for muscle hypertrophy.
We promise to stay in our lane, and our lane is treating muscle dysfunction with a narrow scope on contractile efficiency. We are not competition to physical therapy, chiropractic, massage therapy, athletic training, strength training, etc. We are an adjunct to physical therapy, chiropractic, massage therapy, athletic training, personal training, strength and conditioning.
Your description of Bryson makes it sound like he was strong, but he wasn't ungodly. He wasn't a freak by any means.
When I started with Bryson, it's like, and we'd work out. He comes in my office before, like I'd be working out before his session started, and he'd work out. And like I said, he was more middle of the road strength. This guy's coming in now, and he's lifting weights that took me 30, 40 years to get to and progress to. And he's coming in now and lifting weights that I would have never expected that he would be at, because the integrity of his neuromuscular system is so high. Mm-hmm. And by having that high, he's able to recruit more motor units, which in turn increase strength. And in reality, we talked about it the other day. If I didn't know him and I didn't know the process he'd gone through, the only way you'd see changes like this is if somebody's taking steroids. And I can guarantee you he's not taking steroids, and he's just gone through the most effective training program that you can go to, which has allowed him to maximize his strength potential, and remain injury-free and more flexible.
And it all makes sense to me now when you explain it that way, but at the same time, there's that voice that's, call it a commenter on YouTube if you want, who's just saying like, this is unprecedented, though, to take a golfer who's already successful and already doing well and add 50 pounds to them. Bryson has talked about the possibility of going up to 270 even. That would be an 80-pound weight gain, right? So I want to talk a little bit about that project, because it is it's a different kind of project to say, all right, we're going to add some muscle to you, as opposed to we're going to add a lot of muscle to you. Tell us a little bit about like where that came from and how much that was him versus you, or how much one had to buy in on that.
Yeah, it's all him. I mean, this is what's motivating him, and he wants to see, with everything he does, he wants to see what he can accomplish, and he wants to do the best. I mean, he wants to be the best at anything he does. And on this side of it, he's trying to be the best at improving, creating strength gains while increasing, coincidentally increasing his mass to the point where he can carry a lot of body weight, because his correlation with all of this is we're talking about power, and you got mass times velocity. And so he's wanting to get the mass, as high as he can get. And so that he can, basically, increasing force, and he's trying to increase his force, and he's got the mass side as high as he can go. And then he's been working with a high velocity, and he just feels like his power output will be so much better when he has more mass, because he's not sacrificing anything. He's not sacrificing flexibility. He's not sacrificing, any type of function due to pain or anything like that. So he's actually in a position where he's saying, I want to be as big as I can be. And as long as I don't see any changes well, let's say my standpoint, I told him right from the beginning, I'll support it. And his agent called me to make sure that this was something I was behind, because he was getting torn up, through the golf industry, because he was doing things, like you said, that are unprecedented. And I said, as long as with what he does, as long as he continues to maintain his strength or improve on his strength, maintain his flexibility, and not increase the risk for injury, I'm okay with him having more mass. Because as I said earlier, with all of these factors, his club head speed is increasing. The 3 tournaments prior to this COVID shutting golf down, he was the longest driver on the tour, and he was about 230 then, and maybe 225. So I'm interested to see where he'll be when he comes back. But in his practice routines, he's improving club head speed. He's improving distance. And literally, he told me one time, he's thinking he wants to be like Happy Gilmore, driving greens 400 yards far. And as long as we don't see an increased risk of injury or loss of flexibility or a decline in his club head speed, then I can support it. Right. If we see any of those factors start to deteriorate or get negatively affected, then we got to pull the reins in.
So, and people love to talk about Tiger Woods and why Tiger Woods got hurt all those times, all those years ago, and how it may be related to anything that he was doing in his training at that time. People say, oh, it's the Navy SEAL thing. Or no, he got too big. He looked like an NFL free safety. Or more recently, I heard him say himself, oh, it's because I was running all the time. But that story, that precedent is always out there. You can't avoid the ghost of Tiger Woods in the muscle and golf conversation. How does that inform anything that you do?
I'll be honest, and that side of it is that I guarantee you, with everything he was doing, he was exceeding tolerance levels, and nobody was there to fix what you break. And that's, in a controlled environment with Bryson, we're able, 130 pounds just caused inhibition. We got to back you off until you can prove to me that you can tolerate 130 pounds without causing inhibition or weakness. Because again, when you have inhibition or weakness, you have correlating tightness is the first sign, and pain is the second, where the body shouts out and says, quit doing this until you fix the problem. So I would say the fact that there wasn't that type of monitorization and the idea of training at a high level. You think about people in the gyms, and 90% of the people that work out are working out in pain, and many in chronic pain, because for these reasons. And it's the problem with the exercise industry, is that exercise is breaking people down. And in the ideal state, exercise is supposed to be the cure-all for everything, from coronary heart disease, diabetes, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. Exercise is the cure-all for every disease out there. But if exercise is a stress, and basically the body gets in an overtrained state, think about how people feel when they overtrain. Every athlete is overtrained, and you can't sleep at night. You're irritable. You're depressed. you're in chronic pain, and all of the symptoms that come with overtraining. The body's in a catabolic state rather than an anabolic state. And so literally the body's not in a position where it can repair. So relatively, regardless of the intensity, if you're exceeding tolerance levels on a regular basis and you're never taking the time to allow the body to heal, then you're going to break down. And I would say I know nothing about the training program he was on. I know it was high intensity when you're talking about Tiger, but I mean, I would say that's what I see on a day-to-day basis in my clinic, is people are actually exceeding their tolerance levels and they don't even know they're in an overtrained state.
Right.
And it's like, well, I work out all the time. Why am I not broken down? That's why you're broken down, is because you're working out all the time. And so recovery is the most important part of exercise. And if you don't allow the body to recover and heal, then exercise becomes a stress.
Are you experiencing muscle dysfunction which may be leading to pain or inhibited performance in your sport? Or are you just tired of the aches and pains that relate to the normal aging process? If so, go see an MAT specialist in your area. Go to muscleactivation.com/find a specialist.
Bryson has said in interviews, he was working out 2 to 4 hours a day, sometimes like that. And people say, oh my God, he's going to get overtrained. No, if you're working out for hours and hours a day, there's no way that you're doing anything good past a certain point. I was wondering how much volume did you find you could pour into this guy, and how did you help him recover from it?
Yeah, progressively early on, he couldn't do a lot of volume. And because these tolerance levels that you exceed from a neuromuscular function, it's cumulative. And so, I mean, he could do one set of trunk rotation or spinal rotation. He's doing an exercise. He does one set at a high intensity and it doesn't exceed the tolerance level. And he moves on and has a good workout. But then it's like now he does 5 sets and then he goes to another machine where it has an inverse of action, where now all of a sudden the pelvis is moving with a fixed spine instead of the spine or the thorax moving with a fixed pelvis. He starts doing too many exercises and he exceeds the tolerance level of the muscles that function to rotate the spine. Early on, it didn't take much to, what I say, shut him down. And so we had to monitor, and it's like, do less rather than more. Mm-hmm. As he's progressed and we're monitoring his tolerance level, that's what's allowing him to work out every day. Is the reason that he can work out every day. Right now, we talked about it when he was here the other day, is because we're not seeing it. What he's doing is not shutting him down. And as long as it doesn't shut him down, which i.e. is inhibition or inflammation, then you can keep doing it. But if you exceed your tolerance levels and you have inflammation, you have to repair. You have to recover. And that's when you have to take days off. And the nice part about Bryson is he has a good sense of his body, and he knows when he exceeds a tolerance level because he starts to feel pain. And so if he exceeds tolerance level, he knows to back off. Or we've worked together and he's got activation type techniques, which with active muscle activation techniques, we're actually providing a system where the body, we can speed up recovery of the muscles. You damage the tissue and you break it down. If in a controlled environment, we can actually activate those muscles and get those tissues healed. In an uncontrolled environment, I always say people go and work out, they break themselves down through all putting force on the body. Nobody's there to fix what they break. They have to take the time to recover in between exercise sessions. He has less requirement of time or the need for time to recover because he can stay in an anabolic state rather than a catabolic state.
Now, and you mentioned that a great degree of why he's able to be successful at this is potentially the movements specifically that he's doing. And I'm sure people are curious about that specific thing, like what movements he is doing in order to gain this mass that carries over into a golf swing. I've seen books where people say, oh yeah, just squats and deadlifts are all a golfer really needs as long as they're at a certain level of functionality. How specific is his training for muscle gain to his golf game? How is it changed in terms of the movements that you use when that goal kind of alters?
Well, I think that was the key. He was on, like I said earlier, he was on a more generalized golf-specific training program prior to us starting our work together. And as we've been working together. The way that we work through his body is to recognize that the integrated system is only as good as the function of its isolated parts. And the world has gone to functional training and integrated myofascial training, these total body movements. And if you think about it, if muscles can only contract and contract on demand, when you do any type of integrated movements, the ones that can contract will contract, and the other ones are just along for the ride. So in any type of integrated movement, the strong get stronger and the weak stay weak, and you magnify the imbalances. So doing just squats and deadlifts or things like that are just going to reinforce the imbalances, because literally the muscles that can contract will contract, and you get stronger in your compensation patterns. Whereas what we're looking at is the integrated system is only as good as the function of its isolated parts. We're looking at movement by movement. The muscles that rotate the spine, can these muscles tolerate force? So I basically have a process that has 43 movement patterns that account for all the muscles in the body. And it kind of works from the core out. And like for the first pattern is trunk rotation, and you need a solid foundation because you have muscles in the core that actually contract prior to, if you're trying to lift your arm or lift your leg, you need a stable core to anchor off of. So those muscles can provide stability. And so we work from the core out. So we work trunk rotation, and then we look at trunk flexion, then we look at hip flexion, and then everything spinal side bend to hip extension. We even get as intricate as we get into lower leg and foot movements as subtalar joint pronation, subtalar joint supination, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, where we're actually looking at all the movements that the structure dictates that you can move through. And so literally we go movement by movement in our assessment and treatment process. We go movement by movement, muscle by muscle, to raise the tolerance level related to each movement. Then he can transfer those isolated parts into the integrated system. It's kind of like jump starting your battery and then you drive your car. It's like it reinforces it. So then he can tie it into functional or integrated movements. Like if he went back and squatted or deadlifted, now we know that all the muscles are firing on demand, and now they'll be part of the integrated system. But if you have these weak links, the goal is to make sure he doesn't have any weak link. So he literally has a group of exercise, and it's what I have in my office. We have an isolated exercise piece of equipment for every movement that we account for. So he's got those pieces in his house now. And so now he goes movement by movement. Relative to the total body integrated function, he goes through every movement in the body, even to the muscles of the wrist and hand, and pronation, supination of the forearm, finger flexion, finger extension. But he's not going to miss a beat. And so he's strengthening movement by movement. He doesn't do the deadlifts or the squats or anything like that. But look at the mass he's picked up. Look at the strength he's picked up, because every isolated part is now part of the compound motion. And he's getting strong in all of the isolated parts. And I think that's probably one of the missing links in total training and strength training, is we're only as strong as our weakest link, and those weak links are going to catch up with us and break us down. And again, all we do in integrated type training is strengthen our compensation patterns.
That's really interesting.
Then it's like driving your car with bad alignment.
Right.
The harder and faster you drive it, the faster it's going to break down.
Are you interested in adding MAT to your practice or having it be your dedicated career? Go over to muscleactivation.com/education to see our class offerings. You can learn MAT in a variety of ways: individual modules, a certificate program, and we now even have an associate's and bachelor's program. Yes, that's right, MAT is now its own college program. Our degree programs have financial aid available for those who qualify.
What should guys like us be taking from the example of Bryson Dechambeau at this point?
I think, one, I think is Bryson is a unique example that don't try and do what he's doing. Because even like I said, with his golf swing, if he trained people to swing the golf club the way that he's swinging it, most people would get injured, because he's stable through those end ranges. And so his body doesn't have to protect him at those end ranges. And so he can do it. Most people have, accumulation as we age and we become more dysfunctional. I think that's one of the important things. As we age and we become more dysfunctional, we can't do the things we used to do when we were younger. And that's all due to failure of the muscle system. And so I would say, from learning from that and understanding what we've done, we've prepared Bryson to be able to do what he's doing so that he doesn't injure himself. But we don't want to sit on the back end of it saying, oh, I want to be Bryson, I'm going to do what he's doing, because most people would end up breaking themselves down and injuring themselves. And so I think the best thing for everyone to understand from an exercise standpoint, from a golf standpoint, is we all have tolerance levels. And when we get injured, we always think we need to fix it. And I always say the more people do to try and help themselves, typically push them further down the downward spiral. Mm-hmm. Because when tissues are injured and they're inflamed, they need to heal. And pain is part of inflammation. So if someone's digging into something that's already inflamed, they're compounding the inflammation. They're stressing muscles that are already stressed. So at the time that we do break down and we feel tight, rest, recover. I wish I could give more information. The only other thing I'd say is you're going to see tightness and pain associated when you overstress muscles. And so that tightness and pain is part of the protective mechanism. So don't try and do anything to increase your flexibility. If anything, those isometrics that I talked about, low intensity isometrics into the opposite direction. Basically, if you can't lift your arm up over your head, put your hand in front of the arm and just kind of push lightly into that position. And that starts to reestablish neuromuscular function in those end ranges of motion. So if anything, perform low intensity isometrics as opposed to stretching or massage or any other force on the tissue when the tissue is injured. And it's hard to say over, a podcast like this and have people fully understand, but like I said, the more people typically do to try and help themselves and I need to loosen up this tissue, I need to foam roll, deep tissue, stretch, exercise, whatever it may be, the more people do, they typically push them further down the downward spiral. Recovery is the most important part of exercise. You've got to let your body recover and heal. If you're broken down, give it more time to rest.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We'll post the show notes to this episode on our website. If you found interest in this podcast, please hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to rate and review, and be sure to leave your comments and questions below. Also, check out our Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram channels, where we highlight various muscle activation techniques principles, as well as client and practitioner success stories.